Welcome back to the show.
Good evening and hello world. This is Maya Sendermeyer. And tonight you will hear from Haley Moss, Florida's first autistic lawyer. However, before I begin, I have a few announcements. So, number one, you can find spanking brand new episodes of the podcast on weeknights, Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can also find the other guest interviews at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sunday nights. And if you'd like to be a future guest on the show, do not hesitate to fill out an application, as I'm currently calling for proposals. And I wanted to let you know that you don't necessarily have to be autistic to be on the show. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be Temple Grandin, but you need a topic of expertise related to autism. So please be sure to sit back and relax. And here's what we have to say about that.
This is Maya Sendermeyer. Here on the show with us is autistic lawyer from Florida. This is Haley Moss, and it's an honor to be here. Haley, did you just graduate with your law degree?
I graduated from the University of Miami in 2018 with my law degree, so I've been out of school now for almost 2 years, which is pretty wild to think about. That 2 Mays ago, I was actually walking across the stage and giving the student commencement speech, so my classmates actually elected me to give the send-off for the student body, which is pretty wild for law school. And it's just really been a wild ride since graduating from law school.
So in the biography, it says that Haley Moss was diagnosed with autism at age 3 and made international headlines for becoming as the first documented openly autistic attorney attended to the Florida bar. She received her Juris Doctor from the University of Miami Law School in 2018, as we just talked about, and graduated from the University of Florida in 2015 with a bachelor's degree in Psychology and Criminology. Following her admission to the bar, Haley became aware that less than 1% of lawyers reported having a disability. When she was associated attorney practicing in healthcare and international law, Haley realized her impact in the field was of inclusion as sought out public speaker across the nation. To help revolutionize the practice of law, Haley founded her own company to lead the charge of working and businesses and law firms to hire and retain autistic and neurodiverse talent. Haley is the author of Middle School, The Stuff Nobody Tells You About, a freshman survival guide for college students with Autism Spectrum Disorders, The Stuff Nobody Tells You About. She also illustrated and contributed to the anthology of What Every Autistic Girl Wishes Her Parents Knew. Her writing about autism and neurodiversity and disability has appeared in publications such as The Washington Post, ABA Journal, HuffPost, Teen Vogue, FastCompany, and more. Haley also co-hosts the Spectrumly Speaking podcast, which is dedicated to the women on the autism spectrum. In addition, she has a forthcoming legal scholarship on lawyers and disabilities and disability intersection with standardized testing, as well as on crimes against disabled children. Haley has also been featured in major media as the Today Show, Forbes, CNN, USA Today, Yahoo, and People, to name a few. She currently serves on the constituency board for the University of Miami, Nova Southern University Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, and the Board of Discussion for Different Brains, is the chair of the Unicorn Children's Foundation for Junior Board, and is a chair of the Miami-Dade chapter of Florida Association of Women's Lawyers, Diversity and Community. Congratulations, your story is impressive.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So when did people first start noticing you?
I think people first started really noticing me. Actually, I was 13 years old and I spoke at the Autism Society of America conference. So I was on a panel, and on that panel, I was the youngest one and the only girl. So I remember fielding a couple questions from the audience after this panel. And that's also how I got my start writing, because at the time, that's how I got connected with my first publisher, and I got to write the middle school book because I was just finishing the 8th grade, and I had a lot of feelings, of course, as a 13-year-old girl, having gone through 3 schools in 3 years as a young autistic teenager, and people wanted to hear that. So that was the first time that I got to really share my story on a platform and had the ability to be able to do it. And then when I was in high school, I wrote the middle school book, and ever since then, it's just been an upward journey. So I feel like there's always been something, but I think a lot of people found out about me for the first time as well after I got sworn into the bar. But I like to remind people I've been in this space for half my life now. So I think it's just been very interesting to see where that notoriety comes into play sometimes.
So how did you get into the Autism Society of America? I love them.
I got involved when I was 13 because I was actually asked through some of the folks down here in Miami, because I was diagnosed and worked with the University of Miami system. So they have a Center for Autism and Related Disabilities that I serve on the board of now. And they were the ones who have known me since I was 3 years old and diagnosed me. And they asked if I would be interested in coming to this panel and helping out. And I said, yeah, I'd love to be able to speak. I love being able to give back. I want to help others. And I thought it would be really cool to do. And also it was in Orlando. So when you're 13, you're also thinking, oh, this is Orlando. Yeah, Disney World. So
yeah, I just went to Disney World right before COVID-19 broke out.
Mm-hmm.
And I went by myself, sadly. And I mean, I thought I would like it, but if you don't know what you're doing and you don't live in that area,
mm-hmm.
Disney can be the loneliest place on earth. They talk about it being the happiest place, but I thought, oh, it's the loneliest place on earth.
I kind of get that vibe. I haven't been to Disney by myself that often. I think the only time I've been to Disney alone was for a conference last year. And I remember I got there, I walked around Disney Springs, like the downtown area alone. And I'm like, this is weird. Like, you should be with a family or somebody. Like, you shouldn't be alone in Disney World. It's such a weird feeling. And when we eventually we went to Epcot that night, like the whole conference, because they had a reception in the Italy pavilion.
Mm.
And I remember when we got to the park, we had a lot of time to just explore because they gave us free admission and all this stuff. And I quickly latched onto a whole other group of park attendees because I didn't want to go to the park alone. And I ended up having a good time going with all these, like, it was mostly law enforcement officers. And we just all went on the rides together and acted like we were just best friends. And it made it a lot less lonely.
Well, I ended up having a better day on one of my towards the end of the trip. Like, I mean, I was ready to save the trip for another time, and when the weather was warmer, when the park wasn't so crowded, which
mm-hmm.
I was actually aiming at going back in May, which is next month, but because of everything being closed and things just now slowly opening back up,
mm-hmm. It's always
that
crowded.
That didn't happen. So I just, I stuck to it. And you know what? I ended up running into some amazing people mm-hmm. on a different day at Hollywood Studios. And
mm-hmm.
I actually ended up meeting another group of autistics, and we rode the Millennium Falcon ride together, which was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And that made my night.
Let me know if you ever want a Disney buddy.
Oh yeah, you. And then Paul Silver, he's down there. He's a Disney buddy. Yeah, I would love to. I love a Disney buddy. So
I've been saying for a long time, because I know a lot of autistic people who love Disney and who also love like the Walt Disney World Railroad and the monorails and trains and all that. I'm like, we need to just have a giant like neurodiversity excursion to Disney World.
Yeah, we should totally get DJ Svoboda. Have you met DJ Svoboda?
I don't think so, but
yeah.
I'm also just kind of blanking out on names right now, but I know there's a ton of people who would love to go to Disney.
Well, I don't know if Temple would go to Disney or not, but I wonder if Dr. Wendler would go to Disney.
I think a lot of people would love to go.
Dr. Wendler, and then Dylan Vogue, Real Dylon, Dylan Vogue. He's big too. We could get that. We could get Dylan Vogue. We could get Jennifer O'Toole. She's got red hair like you too.
I love Jennifer.
Oh, me too. She and I really hit it off the last time I met her, and that was before I kind of blew up. I mean, I've actually been a public speaker myself. I mean, I haven't written my first book yet, but I have all my blogs. I eventually want to get with the publisher and write a few books of my own. I don't know how to do that right now. I'm trying to finish this bachelor's degree in psychology, and I've just been getting this podcast up and running. But maybe I should start writing a few books now that I have more time.
Right. What makes you happy?
Yeah, but I have a publisher in mind who I would like to work with, and I've been talking to them for a while. So anyway, I'm going to ask you.
It's just taking the big leap of faith, and I have complete faith in you.
Yeah, I have faith in you. But like you, I'm also a psych major, and I don't think I'm going to go to law school. I want to go into research because I love math. I want to go with statistics. I want to go with statistics, and definitely want to get a PhD. If not, probably something, a master's in developmental psych, because psychology is kind of my world. There's a lot of stuff I know about that. So anyway, I'm going to start asking you questions now. So what are you going to talk to us about on the panel?
Panel is about autism in women, and I also really wanted to help highlight some of the issues and celebrations of autistic women in the workplace, because oftentimes when we do have these neurodiversity at work roundtables, we don't see enough women. Women have other issues in the workplace, and also just I think there's so much focus on STEM generally, so science, technology, engineering, and math, which already have a huge bias against women or are exclusionary to women. So when these companies are specifically recruiting that subset of people, they're inadvertently shutting out autistic women. I remember the first time I had this conversation was with one of the recruiters that did autism at work, and they were talking about how they had like 80-something successful participants, and they hired all these great people. And then they mentioned, but we only hired 7 women. And I just remember, or something like that. It was a very low number. I think it was 7. And I just remember feeling kind of surprised and just said, you need more women. There are plenty of women on the spectrum who are either undiagnosed, misdiagnosed, or late diagnosed, because as we know, the research kind of suggests that there probably are equal gender representation, but we don't see that because of how criteria is written, and women often get mislabeled and things of that nature too. So I think it's really important to not only have awareness and understanding of autistic women, masking, and all the different issues that affect us, but also about women in the workplace.
Well, that's a really, really good reason to look at it. So when you're talking about women in the workplace, have you been to any job sites and dealt with things like tokenism and women in the workplace on the spectrum?
I feel like there is sometimes an element of tokenism with being a person with a disability generally, and that's not even just my own experience, but I realize it when I've talked to companies, because I do a lot of consulting, and I was at a breakfast one time, and the HR representative from a major company said, we hire people with disabilities because it's the right thing to do. And I just remember I was the next speaker or 2 speakers later, and I got up there and was basically arguing why it's not the right thing to do, but the only thing to do. Because like, you don't hire people with disabilities because it makes you feel good. You hire us because 1, it sucks if you don't. 2, we lead to higher revenues, public opinion. It's actually good for business. So it's a smart business decision, not just something that makes you feel good because you took pity. And a lot of us are super qualified. We're often unemployed. So I do think that there's tokenism when people think they're doing it to make themselves feel good about themselves. I think that with women, there's also different issues, especially surrounding things like sexual harassment and things of that nature too, which is kind of a very nuanced conversation to be having, especially because autistic women and women with intellectual and developmental disabilities are more likely to be victims of sexual assault or abuse. And I think it's important that we recognize when something is wrong, how to talk to someone about that, and all sorts of other personal safety things, as well as just being respected at work, and also knowing like you can ask for more, or you can, because so you get the same treatment and equal pay for equal work as men or non-disabled women or non-disabled people in general. There's so much that goes into women in the workplace, especially for people with disabilities and autistic women, that I feel like we could be here all day just talking about some of the nuances. Even if I don't have those specific experiences, I hope that someone in the panel might be able to speak more to it.
Yeah, I mean, my topics are going to be about sexual harassment in the workplace. And everybody, I'm emailing everybody else about their topics related to the panel. Like, I'm talking to you because you're the keynote.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a full idea. I mean, I would have asked you questions. I normally write them up, but I decided to go off the cuff and ask you questions because you have a lot of really good input that I think our audiences need to hear.
Mm-hmm.
But in my situation, I didn't even know if I would do mine by myself, but I will tell you now that my topic is about sexual harassment because I am a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And like you, I'm on the spectrum, and I have dealt with sexual harassment in the workplace before. I mean, my current job, I haven't had that, but I was actually sexually harassed by the boss's brother who owned half of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally did not see it, what he was doing at the time. I thought it was cute and playful. And what he would do is, I mean, what he'd do is he'd come up to me and call him his number one secret girlfriend, Huggy Bunny, Spunky Monkey, and he would give me massages and say filthy things at work about him.
And it was probably also difficult because you mentioned it was the boss and his brother, so you probably felt that there wasn't someone you might be able to go to because it was a family business or something like that too.
It was a family business.
And it's like, who are you going to talk? I feel like that's always such an uncomfortable situation because I think with certain family situations like that, it's like, who am I going to talk to? Who's the HR person? Might be his mother, for instance. Like, are you going to just say to someone's mom, like, hey, your son is doing something creepy?
Yeah, no.
Or his brother, and they're going to, and when it's family, I think it's also very different than when you're working for a major corporation.
Well, it took me 4 years to even realize what he was doing. And the way that I realized that I was being sexually harassed was, I just, when I changed my major to psychology and I took more classes, I started reading about sexual harassment in the workplace. And that's when a light bulb went off in my head. And I said, oh my goodness, I'm being sexually harassed. And so I started to speak up about it, and I started to tell him to stop. And I started to tell him, hey, my body is my property.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him that's not appropriate. And he just kept making fun of me. He kept trying to touch me. He kept trying to bother me. I was trying to get away from him. And that wasn't okay. And that wasn't okay. He just kept on bothering me. And so by the time it got back to the boss, I knew that she would have a fit. I knew that she wouldn't take my side, and I was right, because this woman is very protective of her family. And so she blamed me, and she did the thing where I was, quote, overreacting. And she said, he didn't rape you, did he? He was just playing with you.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, me too. But
I'm glad, as long as you're out of that situation and you're safe, that's what matters.
Well, I got laid off from that job 8 years ago. And it was my dream to go work at a university, and I haven't had that since. And I don't find tokenism where I work now.
That's good.
Yeah. So,
and I think tokenism isn't just people with disabilities. It happens in a lot of other contexts, whether it is women or race or religion or anything else that somehow, and I think it happens a lot with diversity hires. And I realize in law, I realize I do get sought out sometimes because I am the person with a disability that they know, but at the same time, I look at it as well as a really good teaching opportunity for a lot of people who might not have that experience or might not know. And I often will serve on the diversity committees surrounding our profession because many, many times they don't include people with disabilities. And this year I co-chaired the Miami-Dade Florida Association for Women Lawyers Diversity Committee, and it's mostly women that make up this Women Lawyers Association. And I remember when I was appointed to co-chair the committee, I felt like I had to explain, like, people with disabilities are indeed diversity. We're not under health and wellness. And due to this underrepresentation of women with disabilities especially, I have a place to chair the diversity committee because everyone thinks diversity is race for the most part right off the bat. And I'm sure one of the biggest questions when I was appointed is, why is this white woman co-chairing the diversity committee? So I had to kind of explain, like, I am fully aware of where I am not marginalized, but I also realize that disability is a form of marginalization, and it's my job to help bring that to the forefront. And thanks to doing that, like, all of our meetings, all of our events have different accommodation requests. If you want real-time captioning, if you want or need an interpreter, it's available to you, and things like that, that we make it a point now because we finally had the disability representation and people are thinking about it.
See, that's good. I'm really glad that you were able to pass the bars and become an attorney, because when I was 17, I was born in the 80s, and I was a high school student in the late 90s back then. I mean, and this is still an issue today, not as much as it was back then, because autism was considered a rarity back in the 90s.
Oh, definitely.
Back then, I was in high school special ed, and for the fun of it, I was looking through different careers, and the woman in there running the program told me I was wasting my time and that I was unrealistic to even think about becoming an attorney. And unfortunately, some members of my family did not stand up for me. They were not so supportive. They also agreed, well, you're unrealistic. And the special education teachers tried to steer me in a path related to cosmetology. And that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to go on and get a fine education. So
I was pushed in the opposite direction. So I was pushed to try to go somewhere that was way beyond what I knew I was capable of too. So my high school wanted me to go to some really fancy, far away liberal arts college. And I knew that I wasn't ready to live that far away from home. And I needed to also kind of rein them in and be like, hi, this is my comfort level. This is what my needs are. Because they were off. I was in the mainstream system, and I was also in a private school where it was expected that you were going to go to these certain schools. I'm like, I want to stay in state. I don't feel ready to live away from home. I don't want to go on planes by myself. I wasn't ready yet at 17. And I know that was okay. And I feel like that was kind of a big self-advocacy moment for me and my family. Is I was trying to be realistic about what my goals were, but also what my limits were. That I knew as a only child who never even went to sleepaway camp, I was not ready to go hop on a plane and go to school in Connecticut. It just wasn't happening.
Well, see, my situation was the opposite from yours. For me, because I was looked at as broken, I was forced into transition programs, which I didn't like. I was mad because I was stuck there. And so the programs tried to put me under a conservatorship, and they tried to push for it. But luckily, my parents said no. So anyway, at the age of 19, I was in the transition program. I said, no, I'm getting out of here, and I'm getting myself a full education. And I didn't get there overnight. I didn't get to go to college overnight, but because I didn't have the background, I had to find somebody. Luckily, it was my late aunt that that saw potential in me. And so I moved down with her when I was 21 because she just had a lot of I don't know. She had a lot of knowledge and a lot of equipment, and my parents suspected that she was on the spectrum. And they had been talking for a while whether it would be better for me to live with her than it was with them. So I moved in with my aunt for 6 years, and she helped me gain my academia, and then just take baby steps and get my associate's degree. And then I'm getting ready to get my bachelor's at 38, so 38, 39.
I feel like you can't look at it as time. Everyone gets where they're supposed to and on their own timetable. So that's how I feel like about development in general. So I'm really proud of you, and I'm glad that you're doing the thing and you were able to advocate to get there. Yeah,
I'm still advocating to get there, and I mean, I advocated to make sure that I wouldn't stay in that other company for the rest of my life, which is what the job coaches wanted. But anyway.
And I think something else that was really interesting to me is when we talked about our school experiences, it made me think a lot about functioning labels, so that there's people that think that you might not be able to achieve things. While for me, because I did have a high functioning label, so to speak, and was in a neurotypical environment for the most part, everyone thought that I should be able to do that. People thought that I should be able to do all these things without a bat and without thinking about these like neurotypical things. Like, I'm like, I wasn't ready to live away. I know I needed more support. And at the same time, those needs were I had to advocate to have those needs met and not be dismissed. While I think sometimes people who might be receiving special ed services or anything, that people will think less of them or think that they can't do things, while people think that you can, while on the flip side, sometimes people think you can do things that you might not be able to.
Yeah. Well,
just a thought.
Yeah. Well, there are lots of people on the spectrum that can do a lot of cool things.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. And they think differently, but our minds are not the same. Like, look at Temple's mind. She talks about this all the time in her presentations. Mm-hmm. And I've been acquainted to Temple for 5 years. And I actually write blogs for her publishing company, Future Horizons. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that she always talks about in her presentation is that her math department is completely trashed. And so, and she was talking about this last week, and she said that that she doesn't like algebra because it makes no sense to her. But I mean, she thinks that math is interesting and cool, but her mind just doesn't process it that way. I mean, she's better at geometry and better at visual processing. I mean, she's better at building other things. So that's the problem with autism, is everybody thinks that we're all automatically like Rain Man.
Oh my God, I am still saying I'm not like Rain Man. And you were talking about growing up in the 90s. So for me, I was born in 94. Rain Man is older than me. And I'm still telling people I am not like Rain Man. I am not Rain Girl or Rain Woman.
Well,
and each of us are still people with our own different strengths and weaknesses. And there is no one version of autism, and that it is still a disability, and not just socially too. So it's still like, even if people were more accepting and understood, there would still be things that would be incredibly hard for me.
Now, have you ever watched the movie Rain Man?
I have.
What are your thoughts on it?
I mean, I also try to look at a lot of things like Rain Man through a historical lens, because I don't think they would withstand the test of time very well now. Obviously, institutionalization is not really an ideal. We are obviously in more community-based services and home services after the Olmsted decision that people should be in their communities and integrated in their communities however possible. So the whole Rain Man or Ray living in an institution thing probably wouldn't fly today. Yeah. Also, just how they treated it. And what I realized as well, because I was reading a book for kids that was published around the same time as when Rain Man came out, is they very liberally use the R word. And
I hate that word.
Oh, me too. But that would not be a thing today. Right now, someone would call you out on it. And of course, in 1990, people just used it a lot more freely. And I'm like, was it offensive in the 90s? Because I'm pretty sure when I was a kid, if you said the R word, that was not a good thing.
Well, recently I listened to, used to be a favorite stand-up comedian of mine, but he is very ableist. Larry the Cable Guy. And I talked about this in one of my podcasts a couple of months before this all broke out, and before I decided to update my podcast and to live my dream to have guests on the show. And I was talking about it, and you look back at all of his stand-up, I don't know what percentage, but it was a large percentage of his stand-up comedy. It contained content with him making comments about disabled people and making fun of people with the R word and with R word. Like one time he came up with a song called Johnny the Retard or Johnny the R word. Yeah. And then he made fun of him in a, like he had a specific.
Was he called out for any of this, or was this just somehow okay? Because that's kind of what I noticed with the early 90s, late 80s type stuff is I don't know if there was the backlash that it would have had today. Like if you wrote Rain Man today and had it on today's screen, yeah, there would be people who would think it's a good depiction because they just don't know better. And then you'd have a lot of disabled and disability rights activists coming up and saying, this is really bad.
Well, actually, they used the R word back in the 60s and the 50s because
it was a medical term at the time, I'm pretty sure. But
yeah.
I believe by the time we got to the 80s and 90s is when it devolved into more of a slur.
Yeah. Well, actually, they were using it as early as the 50s because Temple said that she got thrown out of a large high school because another student kept picking on her and she just didn't know how to manage her emotions. She said that this other student was calling her the R word, and you are nothing but an R word. And so Temple lost Temple lost her temper and threw a book at another student because she got called the R word.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she got thrown out of there, and luckily she went off to that boarding school, and her mentor is Mr. Carlock. So,
and it's still, so even then, it shows kind of the historical context of the R word, and that's probably a whole other conversation and podcast we can have, is about how language evolves. Because I know even in the 13 or so odd years I've been in the advocacy space, I've seen language evolve a lot too. But I think that we're at a point now that the R word isn't in as wide of circulation, thankfully. But I still will call people out if they say it, because I still hear it every once in a while. And of course, now there's other ableist language that kind of falls in, isn't quite as severe as the R word, but still gets used quite a bit. And I realize I use it sometimes too, and I have to kind of call myself out on that own internalized ableism sometimes. So we realize that words like moron and idiot and things like that also have these connotations, but they're so ingrained in our culture. And it's, where do you draw the line, and when, how slow is change going to get made, or how fast can we make change? Yeah. And come up with better alternatives, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. Anyway, getting back to the employment situation. So I didn't want to talk about this is, I mean, what percentage of employers are using those kind of terms on autistics?
Hopefully not that many, because then I'm pretty sure you have an HR complaint.
Yeah. Is that what that company I work for again? They were very ableistic there, and they often would talk about anybody that worked there was not all there. They didn't call them stupid. They called them not all there. And for me, you know, I was upset when I didn't get the same privileges as other people. And the same guy who harassed me, it was like, it's not your fault that autism chose you. And you're so angry. It's not your fault that autism chose you.
See, I would just have, what happened to me at work is people just thought I was all the stereotypes. So I'd get assigned to certain like data jobs and certain very computer and technical things, because you're good at computers, right?
No.
And me, I didn't want to speak out and say I'm not a computer person, because I really just wanted to impress my supervisors, and I wanted them to be happy with the job I was doing. And I realize I'm a people pleaser, and I know that there's also this fear and there's this desire to make other people happy. And I realize that's a personality thing, and also that you want to be accepted at work. So even if I was not the data person, I was still able to do the job. It's not that I wasn't able to do it, because it was part of like discovery and litigation, but I'd always get assigned these like data production type things, because data research and things that involve computers. And I'd be able to do them, but I also felt pressure to do it really well and also quickly, because I felt that there was this stereotype about autism and computers that I had to be the computer wizard.
Oh, yeah. Well,
so I feel like there's the whole other side of ableism, is there's people that think you aren't capable of understanding things. And then there's people that just think automatically that you must be the next Bill Gates. And they forget that there's a whole in between, and that we have so many varied interests and talents, and it kind of dismisses who we are, no matter how you look at it, if you look at one or both of the extremes of stereotypes.
Now, I am good at math, but you know what? I'm not a savant. I'm not a super whiz. I'm not one of those people that automatically gets it. I have to practice the math until it clicks. Once it does click, I love it. It's like plugging numbers into things. But what percentage of autistics are really, really, really fascinated with the math and the geeky stuff?
I don't know if we'll ever know an exact percentage of that, because there are so many people who are undiagnosed or misdiagnosed or might not share a diagnosis. So I think we might never get an accurate number, or if it's just something that we latched onto because of the people who are open about their autism and who are out there that are in those fields. So it's something that I think is very difficult to pinpoint.
So now another issue I've noticed with women on the spectrum is the ones that are diagnosed. Those individuals tend to feel afraid to talk to anyone that they're autistic, because they want to be accepted. And this is what Dr. Holmes talked about in another interview. Have you been interviewed by Dr. Stephanie Holmes on Converge Autism Radio yet?
I have not.
Yeah, I did a podcast with her on my transitions from high school into college. And so one of the things she talked about was masking. And so
I have a lot of feelings on masking.
Could you talk about those?
I think a little bit. So I realize that a lot of autistic women do it, especially because there is this pressure to be socially accepted, especially when you are in a neurotypical environment. It's this masking and camouflaging thing. I also think that we code switch a lot. So we kind of, how we talk and how we act depends on who we're around. So I realize even in autism spaces this happens. So even just how we talk about ourselves. So if I'm around a bunch of neurotypicals, sometimes I might not be as quick to just always say the word autistic. I might say on the autism spectrum a lot more because I realize it's their comfort level and that might not be what I want to use, but I realize at the same time you're kind of code switching based on the environment you're in. And I think a lot of masking is a lot of survival strategies and coping strategies. Even if it does burn you out, you want to also feel accepted. You want to feel a part of things. You don't want to be seen as other. And I think a lot of women struggle with that, and ultimately it impacts us.
Yeah. Now for me,
that we're sacrificing ourselves at the comfort of making other people feel better.
Yeah. Now for me, I am very open about being on the spectrum.
Oh, me too.
I don't I don't know if I still mask. If I do, I'm probably not even aware of it. Mm-hmm. But it's not always easy to be open when you're on the spectrum. Mm-hmm. Because you never know what kind of answers you get. Like some people who are the really ignorant ones will come up and tell me that I'm using my autism as an excuse. Or they tell me that I'm an attention seeker, or others.
I am so sorry.
Or not, it doesn't happen often, but I've had it happen in my blogs a couple times. I mean, on mm-hmm. YouTube, before I started writing on WordPress and I started the podcast on here. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I have people that talk about how I'm delusional and nuts and things like that.
I'm sorry. So I think that kind of happens based on what the mainstream or people that aren't in the autism community see, is they think that you're either very autistic or not autistic enough to be believed. Yeah. So I feel like they have this version based on what they've seen on TV or your friends' kids of what like the model autistic person is. And obviously nobody's ever going to measure up to it.
I mean,
there's no one presentation of autism.
I mean, the movie Temple Grandin, I think mm-hmm. that movie was inspirational. And I think they did a good job of showing her life, but it wasn't my favorite movie. Mm-hmm. Just like I don't like Rain Man. The Temple Grandin movie is not my favorite, even though Claire Danes did a good job, and then they mm-hmm. did some good things with the way she thinks. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, everybody just kind of looks at movies like that, and have
you seen Everything's Gonna Be Okay yet on Freeform?
Nope.
You should definitely check that out. So it's it's one of those teen comedies, but the autistic character is a teenage girl, and the actress who plays her, Kayla Cromer, is also autistic herself. So it really is I think it's a lot more of an authentic representation in TV and film. So It's something that makes me pretty excited.
Well, actually, I was just listening to Temple on Autism Live. I mean, have you been interviewed on Autism Live yet?
I have.
Yeah, Shannon Penrod. I haven't been interviewed on there yet, but I do listen to Autism Live, and I have met Temple's friend Anita Laskow. Have you met Anita?
I've worked with Anita, but I haven't met her in person yet.
Oh, she's really nice. She's an interesting lady too.
There's a ton of really cool people in this space, and there's tons of people who I've either worked with online or haven't had the chance to meet. And I'm sure you and I can go through after the show and just talk about who we know, who you should be connected with, and we could probably put our heads together when we're not recording and have a really, really powerful time. Yeah, maybe we could do a Zoom. We could try to get Anita, and we could see if we get Anita on Temple. I mean, I've known Temple for, again, 5 years. We've been acquainted. Mm-hmm. Through a series of networks, and then I put myself out there. Mm-hmm. And that's why I was able to do that podcast with her, which was a real honor. But getting back to the work situation, I've lost my train of thought. I know it's hard, and I feel like there's just a lot to talk about, because I always feel like a good podcast is a lot like having coffee with somebody and you just talk.
Yeah. Well, that's the objective of the podcast, and honestly,
you're just getting to know people.
Yeah, I think I like the podcast idea better than the YouTube and my vlogs. I mean, vlogs are fun; they can be creative, but I like podcasts better. More people are interested in radio than they are in TV. And so that's why I like the podcast. I mean, I don't listen to NPR, but I love the whole concept that podcasts are kind of a spin-off of NPR. Mm-hmm. So
back to workplace.
Yeah, it is. So anyway, I listened to Temple talk about talking about being authentic, and someone asked her a question live on Autism Live, and she agreed that that's a really good idea. So she didn't put anybody down, which I'm so thankful about. So when she said that, I wrote Temple rocks. So, by the way, I think Temple's mom is going to be on Autism Live. Have you met Eustacia Cutler?
I have not met them yet.
You should have not met either Temple or Eustacia.
Not in person.
Have you read any of their books?
Yes.
Which ones have you read?
I remember reading Emergence and Thinking in Pictures.
I love Emergence.
It's been a while.
Emergence is one of my favorite books, and then I like The Autistic Brain. I have Thinking in Pictures as well. So
I have read a lot of books over the years.
I mean, I need to get into reading, but the first step for me is keeping that TV off, because there's more to life than just binge watching, and even if you're stuck in your house right now.
Mm-hmm.
So
I also just love to watch. I also just love to read things.
Yeah, well, I should be doing more. I should be doing more reading, and honestly, I find that when I break out into it, I like it a lot better, and I just kind of get engrossed into it. So anyway, a question that I have for you. So what are you currently doing to try to break the cycle where too many people on the spectrum are under and unemployed? What are some tactics that are in place, and what are some laws that you know about that are being pushed in place to shut down the large number of employment rates for autistics?
So there are no specific laws that are shutting it down, but I do think that first off, I think the most important thing is employer education. So obviously there's a lot of focus on educating autistic people to be job ready. So about job clubs and like vocational rehab and job coaches, that there's so much focus on training us, but there's not enough focus necessarily on training employers either and helping them. So I think it's really important that companies are getting the same experience and getting to know how to work with us and recruit us too. So that's a lot of what I focus on, and also making sure they understand that it's beneficial to engage us and have us. So that's something that to me is a big standout thing. I think legal-wise, as you know, that people and companies, especially if you employ more than 15 people, because that's what's in the law, is you can't discriminate against us in employment. So at any time, from the job application all the way to hiring, firing, promoting, all these different things are covered underneath the Americans with Disabilities Act, which turns 30 this year. So that is a huge civil rights legislation package that is mostly anti-discrimination for people with disabilities. So we actually have the same rights as anybody else. It's an absolutely wonderful package of laws. It needs an update in certain regards too, and I have a lot of feelings about it. I do a lot of research on the ADA, and I think it's wonderful. And I think that's something that employers need to be aware of is, yes, and that's also where things like reasonable accommodations come in too. So that is kind of the big law that protects us in employment.
So let's say, because we have a lot of people now that are underemployed, and the thing I don't like about vocational rehabilitation is they promise to put people back to work. But the thing is, there's always the long waiting lists, and the employers, it's like the counselors here in Georgia, they are awful. Like these counselors have promised family members, different things, and then they often don't carry through with them. They often tell them that the program that they're going to put them in shut down or something fell through. And on top of that, there's a high turnout rate for these counselors that they don't stay very long because they get burned out, and then they themselves are underpaid. And so because of that, and in addition to funding constantly coming and going, the clients at vocational rehabilitation constantly get dropped. And then Voc Rehab, often they don't really send them to anybody who's positive. A lot of the times they send them to people with very, very small minds. Like I know somebody that was working with an employment specialist, and he had a very small mind. He kept trying to put him into the wrong positions that would set off his anxiety, wanted him to bag groceries. And my friend tried to tell him, no, I'm autistic. This isn't going to work for me. And his employer, this employment specialist, did not listen to him. He told them that he needed to tough it out, man it up, and he also did not help him try to find the jobs. He would make him go and apply at different places like Publix and Kroger on his own, and then instead of trying to advocate for him to get the job or network for him, he just told him to be more aggressive. Contact these people, contact these people, contact these people. So this man was a terrible representative, and my friends have had a terrible time with VR. I had a terrible time with VR, and because of them, that's how I got that terrible job at the, I mean, they didn't put me in there. They put me through a sheltered workshop, but that's how I got that terrible job that I've been talking to you about. So I hate Vogue rehab.
Everybody has different experiences, and I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind.
Yeah. So, but so basically, what do we do to decrease the high rates of unemployment among autistics?
I think we really need to put the onus on educating employers and making sure that they know why we are good employees, why it's good to be hiring us, and not because it's the right thing to do, but because it's actually good for business.
Yeah. The thing is, with those people that do the right thing to do, I was talking to Temple last week, and she said that when she goes around and tours different places and she goes and gives talks at these places, which, by the way, I do believe that some of these companies do use Temple as a token just to make themselves look good, because she's Temple Grandin. And so anyway, she said that she's gone to big companies where they hire people on the spectrum, and she said that there were people there working that were part of a disability department, but they were segregated from everybody else. And is that what do you get? Is that tokenism?
I haven't seen that recently, but I think that is a sort of exploitation of sorts, of just having us separate from everybody else, especially if you're paying us less or not giving us the same types of work or what we're actually qualified for. So I think it's important to have us included in the workplace, however that might be, whether it's socially on the same teams. I think that neurodiversity genuinely benefits everybody.
Well, yeah, I agree with Temple. I mean, she wasn't very happy when she heard that. And when I heard her actually say that, I thought, what, really? And I'm learning that, you hear all these stories in the news about how this or that company were hiring people with autism, and they make it look like a fairy tale for people on the spectrum. But then Temple gets in there to the reality and sees what's really going on. That makes me so angry. And I'm sorry she had to see that. So, but what are some of the other issues in the workplace that you've seen?
I think we kind of addressed a lot of the major ones, and I think that this is definitely something that is a huge discussion overall, and it's really important to get as many voices as possible.
Now, another thing I notice in the workplace is I notice that if you're the odd person out, these people hire you and they pay you and everything. It's not just the low pay. It's not just the tokenism. What I've noticed, I mean, I have to run too, but what I've noticed, Haley, is people who act like that are people who hire individuals. First of all, I notice that I don't know. I've lost my train of thought. It's the way my brain is processing things.
It's okay. There's a lot going on.
Yeah. Well, I notice what I notice is that these employers, they not only do they exploit them, but they don't celebrate their accomplishments. They're there for everybody else, but they're not there for them. And these other employees, it's like if they have a celebration or something, it's like they matter to the company. But if it's the person with the disability, everything of theirs is a joke.
I'm sorry that happens, and I've noticed that things happen too.
Yeah. So that's not, would that be discrimination, or what is that? Okay. Would that be discrimination? So would that be discrimination, or what is that?
I'm sorry, I completely missed out on what you were talking about.
So talking about people in the workplace, I'm talking about unfairness, where the person with the disability, they're included to work, but they're still the outsider when it comes to people being friends with each other. But they don't.
I don't know. I think it's that people just don't understand. And that's something that I've noticed happens more often than not. And it's not that people are trying to discriminate against you or have their ableist biases and all that stuff, but sometimes people just don't get it. And they just don't want to understand, or they're afraid of something that they don't know. And I feel like it's hard to fault people for being afraid, which is why I spend a lot of time preaching education.
Right.
Because if we educate people and they know better, they don't have to be afraid.
No, they don't. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. I look forward to meeting you in person.
Me too. I'm excited to meet you.
Yeah. Well, and Again, congratulations again. And I can't wait. I think I'm going to have to read your books.
I'm excited to get to read yours someday. So keep writing and keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you so much. If you'd like to be a future guest on the show, know that I'm calling for proposals, and you don't have to be an autistic to be on the show, or a spectrumite necessarily. You just have to have a topic of expertise that'll reach wider audiences that people can take away from. So, well, thank you so much, Haley. If you know anybody who'd like to be on the show, do not hesitate to let me know.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.